Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me for the Teen Anxiety Maze this week. Do you know that your anxiety lies to you? Well, today I am so excited because I have an amazing guest, Brittany Richmond, and she is a best-selling author of the book Lies My Anxiety Has Told Me. And I can't wait to hear what some of those things were. But more importantly, she is an award-winning teen and young adult mental health speaker. And I love that so much. And I had reached out to her because I love this lifestyle. Like, I want to know more about it. And I was like, how do I get to do this too? But also, I just wanted you to know her information and hear about her because I want, as always, I want all of my listeners to know all the adults in the world that are helping teens and young people because that's what I'm doing too. So, Brittany, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. The fact that you called me an adult is like high praise. So thanks.
I know. I know sometimes, even though I've been an adult for a very long time, I forget sometimes that that's what I'm doing. And I think when you work with young people, you have to have kind of like that dual personality where you're also a teenager too. And I think that's
Oh yeah.
why I relate to teenagers so well because I have never gotten rid of that teenage angst, rebellious. I have that
Yes.
streak about me, and I think that's why I totally get kids, and I'm sure that's why you do too.
Yes, I often tell them, I'm like, the only difference between me and you is I pay my own bills. That's literally probably the only difference. And I can totally relate because Bender from the Breakfast Club is like my spirit animal. And he was like
Uh-huh.
the angst, like a troubled youth. And I'm like, not that
Uh-huh.
I was like a troubled youth, but like something about his vibe. I'm like, I want to hang out with that guy. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes. And I loved that you had the Breakfast Club in behind you yesterday when we were talking because,
Yes.
oh,
I know.
that right there, you were probably just turned a different way.
Yep.
Um, that movie came out my senior year of high school,
Love it.
and I was obsessed with that movie because I was several of those characters actually, but I
Same.
definitely was
Same.
I was a rebellious teenager and got in a lot of trouble and did crazy things, and my parents were very sad about all of it. And I also had that feeling of I just want everyone to get along. I just want everyone to understand each other's stories and get each other. And I kept thinking, why can't this really happen? And it's still probably not ever really happened in real life where teens of all different backgrounds sat down and decided that they all liked each other. I mean, I'm sure it does sometimes, but yeah, I just thought it was fun because that was a really important movie for me because of they were the age that I was when I saw it, and it just really made a lot of sense to me. So,
I
well,
love that. I was
tell
also there. I saw it in theaters too. My mom was pregnant with me. So I guess
oh,
technically I was also there. But because it came out in 86 and that's when I was born. But,
yes.
that's why the Breakfast Club is a huge part of what I talk about. It's a theme throughout my book. It's because that's what I do. I help kids have these conversations that
Mhm.
ultimately shows that they're not alone, but breaks down that like we have this perception of everybody's reality, just like the Breakfast Club, right? You have this
Mhm.
perception about what you think about someone based on what they choose to put out to the world. And it's like, but every single one of them to some degree had experienced like trauma, abuse, neglect, anxiety, depression, worries, comparisons, limitations, expectations, the like every
Mhm.
single one of them to some degree. So,
Mhm.
and when I talk about the movie, which you think it wouldn't be relatable to teenagers today, but I had a teenager run up to me after an event and she's like, I have a Breakfast Club tattoo. And I was like, stop it. We got a picture together. She has a Breakfast Club
I love
tattoo
it.
on her ankle. And I immediately showed my husband because I was like, you said when I started talking about the Breakfast Club, teens today would not relate to this movie, which by the way, they do. But you don't have to see the movie for me to make my point. But also, side note about the Breakfast Club, I spoke at a school once a couple years ago, and after, like it was a couple weeks after, because I talked about the Breakfast Club, the consumer science teacher sent me an email. She got a hold of my email and she was like, I just want to let you know, like after your talk, I showed the movie to my consumer science class. And she said that everybody in there, which was all freshmen, she said everybody in there said I should show it to every incoming freshman class from here on out. So she does that today. She does the last few
Oh,
years she does
wow.
it. because they can see themselves in, just like you said, you were multiple of these characters. I mean, yes, it's a movie from the 80s, but it's exactly relatable today. The only difference
Mhm.
is they don't have cell phones. That's the
Mhm.
only difference in that movie. And it's just such a good lesson. Anyway, that was a
Mhm.
sidebar, but that's a little
Well,
bit
I
back.
love it. Well, I've always thought that teenage themes have never changed from the beginning of time. It's
Right.
just the situations, the cell phones, that like the different things that are happening in the world at that time, but how teens feel and what they think about the world has never changed. And so that's why that movie will always be classic. Like I don't think it will ever go out of style because kids can relate to it because it's exactly how they feel. And I love that because, the people that were playing the characters were adults and probably whoever wrote it was an adult, but yet for some reason they could like really hone in on what is it really like to be that age. And we get to do that in our lives. And I want to do more of it in person, but I want to know about your anxiety story because I sometimes feel bad. I mean, I know a lot about anxiety, and I've worked with tons of kids who have anxiety, and my daughter has anxiety, but I don't have anxiety has not taken anything away from my life. I'm not diagnosed with anything. I don't have to take any medication. I can, handle it or manage it, even though I wasn't really taught it. And so I want to hear from people who really are like truly managing it and living a great life.
Wow, how much time do you have? Like, good Lord, because it has evolved, through
Yes.
life. But I think the main thing I like to say is I no longer suffer from it. I live with it because
Yeah.
there's this, there's anxiety is a normal emotion. Okay. It's
Yes.
been it's very normal. And that's one thing I tell teenagers too, because I think a lot of times, and my husband is an educator and I was a school counselor for many years, even like just the other day, he came home and he's like, yeah, he's a driver's ed teacher. So he lives in the world of anxiety, but he,
Yeah.
this one student was driving and she was like, and she missed a turn or something. And she was just like, oh my gosh, it's giving me anxiety, to make
Mm.
this turn. And my
Yeah.
husband was like, it's not actually giving you anxiety. You're just nervous, so there's like this.
Hmm.
So he likes to make the distinction for teenagers. And I think that's important too, is, anxiety in and of itself is such a buzz, trendy word. I want to make sure
Hmm.
that they're paying homage to what exactly anxiety is. So
Right.
but yes, so well, I grew up that way, but I think that,
Mm.
there's a lot of contributing factors, but there was just a time in my life, specifically in my teen years, middle school, high school, and then definitely early college where things peaked. And, my anxiety manifested itself in excelling and overachieving and
Mm.
being a perfectionist. And I was I was the model student. I got great grades. I was the captain of my sports teams. I was in all the clubs, exec boards. I was the student that a teacher was like, hey, go make 12 copies of these at the office. And you just walked in the office and nobody asked, like nobody cared because you were like looked at as like a model student, right? Like this is
Hmm.
but and as a school counselor, and we talked about this yesterday, the students that they would send me were the risky behavior students, bad home lives, poor grades,
Hmm.
disciplinary issues, outward behaviors of angst and stress and trauma and all these things.
Hmm.
I was dealing with all of those things. My outward kind of like way of showing it was covering it up through excelling. And
Hmm.
because I didn't want people to know how I was feeling. And I
Hmm.
also felt like the more I achieved, the less people questioned me, the less
Hmm.
people, saw flaws in me because I was like, oh, that I was valued on the overachieving. I was
Hmm.
award
Hmm.
winner and all these things. And it was like, oh, they see me as this person, but they don't really know what's going on
Yeah.
underneath. And
Yeah.
so that's just kind of how I covered it up. And so I always challenge like educators and people because when I spoke at my high school a couple of years ago, I had a teacher and all the same teachers are there. Okay, we're in a rural school
Right.
where everybody knows everybody, same teachers, and I'm almost 40 and they're still there. And they this one came up to me because she had actually started her teaching career when I was a sophomore. So she was like
Mm.
22 when I was like 16. So there really wasn't a huge
Hmm.
difference between us. So she came up to me after the talk and she said, I had no idea. And she hugged me and
Mhm.
she's like, thank you for reminding me to check in on my overachieving students.
Yeah.
And I'm like, these are the students that fall through the cracks, in my opinion,
Mhm.
because we don't see them in those ways. We see them as
Right.
things are good, things are fine.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that became such an issue, and I applied for this amazing college and it was all or nothing. That my mindset has always been all or nothing. It's
Mhm.
just once it's in you, it's in you. And so it's really hard
Mhm.
to break that. I've been working on that for years. And I got into this prestigious school and I only lasted a week and I dropped
Mm.
out because, you know, the anxious symptoms just got so severe
Mhm.
that I had no other option. Like
Yeah.
and that's what I don't want for teenagers.
Yeah.
It's normal to have anxiety, to a certain degree. When it becomes an issue, doesn't mean that it's something we can't manage. And I just don't want it to get to the point where it starts altering your life decisions. And because you don't know how to deal with it. And the big thing is they just don't know how to talk about how they feel, which is what I do is
Mhm.
if I feel like if I just had the ability to tell someone how I was feeling, because when you talk about how you feel, the less power it has over you. And
Mhm.
there's so much like anxiety makes us feel out of control, but we're in more control than we realize, and it's how
Yeah.
can I help them take this power? But, after high school, I dropped out of college, went to community college, got into therapy, diagnosed with multiple anxiety disorders, including an impulse control disorder that I still live with today. It's called trichotillomania. It's where you pull your hair out
Mm.
in response to anxiety. That's just something you manage. It never really fully goes away. And very common. I speak to teenagers all the time, and you won't believe how many teenagers come up to me and they're like, like I just gave them permission to release the shame or something. And I'm
Right.
just
Yeah,
like,
they probably never told anyone that they had it.
and it's super common. That's why I tell people, I'm like,
Mhm.
it's just like, it's as common as biting your nails. Like, it's as
Mm.
common as these impulse control issues that we see. But, and
Is biting nails an impulse control?
it
Because I
depends.
did that my whole life.
It depends. There's like, a bunch of, if you go into the world of psychology, they're going to tell you a lot of different things about things like
Mhm.
biting nails and stuff. But at the end of the day, if it's an impulse control issue, there's a reason you're doing it. So the theory is if you can identify the trigger that causes you to do it, you can handle the trigger and thus you wouldn't do this anymore. That's kind of like what
Okay.
they
Hmm.
say.
Sure.
And which is true for Trick as well. But yeah, so that's kind of a long story. And then I suffered so severely in my early 20s. I tell people my 20s were the worst 10 years of my life. I was, in one abusive relationship after another, constantly seeking validation
Hmm.
because I'm
Yep.
trying to be the perfect person, and all the things.
Yes.
And
Yes.
gained 70 pounds in college. I was an athlete that totally stopped doing the things that are healthy and that serve you. I treated my body terribly. And I did that because I was so anxious that I did the things that made me feel better. And the things that
Yeah.
made me feel better in the moment were like binge drinking and binge eating and things like that. And then
Hmm.
when that wears off, you feel bad.
Yep.
So what do? You feel bad. You do the things that make you
Do
feel good.
these. Yes.
And it was just a cycle that just didn't stop. And because of that, I still live with things like body dysmorphia and I really struggle with my eating. I'm working on like my relationship with food because of what happened almost 20 years ago. So it's just very like it's a constant work in progress,
Yep.
but we're in a much better place. And I credit
Yeah.
therapy, I credit medication, I credit my faith, I credit surrounding yourself with people that lift you up and letting go, setting boundaries. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
things. And again, I'm rambling. So let's just take a pause
No,
on what
no, well, I love, well, all of that stuff, what you're saying, it's just brought up so many things in my mind. But one of the things I want to ask you about the hair pulling is my grandson does hair twisting or hair twirling, and we
mm,
can't even comb through his hair because
so
he's
knotted.
twisted it so much that it's just like dreadlocks kind of. And I wonder if that, I mean, I've always felt like that's a comforting thing for him, but I wonder if it isn't, almost on this other edge of, I don't know. I don't like to I mean, I'm obviously not diagnosing him, but, and he's only 3, but I see so many tendencies with him about being alarmed by things that I'm like, this isn't an alarming thing. Like he was getting scared about flies, and I'm like,
Mm.
it's just a fly. And he was just like couldn't handle being outside because there was a fly, and just like stuff like that. And I'm just like, where does this all come from? And how did this all happen? And I'm always watching to make sure, how do I deal with him in the best way, and how do I help him, and how do we know when we should, do the next thing or do something to help him. I don't know.
I can't speak to the twisting. I'd have to like actually look into like specifically
Hmm.
what potentially what the
Yeah,
DSM says. Like they give you all
right.
different things, right?
Sure.
But as far as like what you said, it was comforting. It is comforting. Like
Yeah.
I think that, and I pull out my eyelashes. That's what I do. I mean, I do it when I don't even know I'm doing it. I do it when I'm very aware I'm doing it, but I can't
Hmm.
stop. I don't,
Yeah.
because when I actively stop, it's like you have a physiological response in your body. And it's like you have to complete this task. Like it's kind
Mhm.
of that's the best way I can describe it is
Right.
it's comforting, it's a comfort thing. It also, and this is going to sound, but this
Mhm.
is just what this podcast is for, but
Yeah.
sometimes it's a little painful
Mm.
and we're kind of like we inflict pain that way. And then
Yeah.
immediately after you feel shame and you're looking in the mirror and you're like,
Yeah.
I could have stopped that. But like,
Hmm.
it's very
Hmm.
difficult to explain, but the key is to identify what is causing that behavior. Like
Sure.
I have a master's in behavioral psychology, and that was always a big thing was what is the target behavior? Because oftentimes in
Hmm.
the world, and I see this a lot with young people, especially in the school system. Again, my husband is a teacher, is like they want to treat the symptom, not the cause. That's
Yes.
the issue. And it's like
Hmm.
that's why we see a lot of kids sometimes over medicated and all these things. And it's like,
Hmm.
are they in therapy also? And like, well, no,
Hmm.
we're just trying to alleviate the symptom. The symptom's going
Yes.
to go away if
Right.
you don't target the cause. So
Right.
that's one of the big things I would say when you start to take ownership and control, which is what I talk about in the book, is
Hmm.
stop blaming other people, stop feeling sorry for yourself. You have the power to change this. And it's like
Hmm.
how can and take the control. Start to
Yeah.
identify the behaviors that are causing you anxiety. If you can work on those behaviors, in theory, the anxious symptoms should dissipate. That's the theory.
Sure. Well, I love that you're talking about that in your book because I think that's exactly what I'm seeing with kids that I mean, I have clients that take what I talk to them about, and it's a lot of mindset and finding out like what mindsets are creating these thoughts and ideas, and then how do you allow yourself to feel that uncomfortable feeling in your body and not do the things, and then how do you plan for that in the future? Like, okay, these things are going to, anxious situations will happen again. And what will you do the next time? Because now we know these different things. So it sounds like exactly what I'm kind of teaching. But I notice that my clients that don't do well, and, I have a 12-week program. And so when it's over, some of them are like, well, I'm this in the same place that I was before. It's always because they still don't see that they have control over some of the things, or that they have agency in the thoughts that they're choosing. Like your book being called Lies My Anxiety Told Me. Just when they know that those thoughts are not true, the things that your brain is telling you, doesn't mean that that's really what's happening. These people maybe don't even know you, and your brain's telling you that they hate you, or your brain's telling you you're not good enough to do something when that's not true at all. Like those kinds of things. And we talk about how those are just stories that our brain is trying to tell us, and how can we reframe them, think about them differently, not think about them at all. I mean, however we want to do that. But I love that you're telling them about the control they have, because I think that's the main thing. When I get in my teenager brain, I think about the part that, I mean, the most pain that I experienced as a teenager was because of thinking that I had no control over anything that was happening. and that my parents were the problem, my teachers were the problem. I am screwed up and I'm the problem, like all these things. And if I would have had the tools I have now to change my thoughts around to different things, I'm not saying, I mean, I love my life. My life turned out exactly the way I wanted it to, but I could have gotten here faster. I could have
Right.
gotten here with less suffering
Yeah.
if I would have known these things. And that was the main reason why I want to tell teens about it, because I'm like, oh, take this information right now and start doing something with it, because you don't have to suffer all these years and try to figure it out. And we can
You know,
help.
yes, and kids want the help. And I say
Yeah.
kids, they're young adults, but
Yeah.
they want the help. That's why they talk about it. And we need to recognize that. And I think that something I get told a lot is, well, I like to give grace too, because
Mhm.
neurologically, I mean, we know that the part of your brain that allows you to reason and see big picture doesn't even get developed till you're like 25, like, which
Mhm.
is wild, right?
Yeah.
So when we say things to students like, oh, just get over it, or,
Mhm.
it's really hard to see past what they're currently feeling, which is why
Mhm.
I think we see a lot of self-harm and suicide ideation in young people, because in that moment they are so consumed they can't see a way out of it, and
Mhm.
neurologically that's part of the thing that works against them.
Yeah.
It hasn't developed yet, so it's sad, but like one of the things that I think is important to everybody listening is like exposing these young people to those situations is also extremely beneficial for them.
Mhm.
We tend to avoid, and I'm not a parent, but I'm a daughter, obviously.
Mhm. Mhm.
I've lived through situations my parents tried to protect me from, right? Like they're
Mhm.
as a parent, I'm a cat mom and I want to protect my cats from all the things, right? So,
Yeah.
but that is how they learn, is by
Mhm.
failing forward, and they learn to emotionally regulate. They learn to deal with conflict. They learn to respond and learn how to respond. I mean, we want to protect so much. And I'm not blaming, parents or
Right.
adults, but I do think there is accountability to be taken on this side, is that when I was young and I fell down on my bike, my parents dusted it off and put me back on the bike. Now it's
Mhm.
like, don't ride the bike. It's
Mhm.
very much the,
Yes.
how are they supposed to fall down and get back up? It's
Right.
so, but as far as like, talking to these students, and they have these anxious moments and they don't know how they're going to get through it, I think constantly reminding them that they've been through it before. That was really
Mhm.
helpful for me. That was something I had
Mhm.
to actively tell myself when I was going through things, even in my 20s, is like, I mean, fairly recently. I mean, we're talking January of 2024. I
Mhm.
had a terrible, like, 4-day anxiety attack. I couldn't get out of
Mhm.
bed. My husband was worried about me. I was just crying constantly. I wasn't eating, it's just, but even in the middle of it, and he's like trying to console me, I'm like, I'm gonna make it through this because I
Yeah.
have before. And there's so much power in that. And like, it's just,
Mhm.
and I'm not trying to like toot my own horn. That's not what I'm saying, is like, constantly reminding these students, like, and not saying things like, this isn't the worst thing you're going to go through. I think that's unhelpful
Right. I know.
narrative. It's
Mhm.
like, you're going to make it through because you've already been through hard things.
Mhm.
And that, I think there's so much power in that. But, the stigma is alive and well. That's also not helpful. Even today, I mean, it's something I deal with especially the much older generation. I,
Mhm.
I tell them what I do, and they're like, oh, do you just tell them to suck it up and stop being weak and get over it? I
Yeah.
mean, it's just
Yeah.
because they're seeing this younger generation just really struggling.
Right.
And, and for the record, those older generation, they're like, we didn't know the word trigger and all this other stuff. I'm like,
Mhm.
yeah, but you called depression melancholy. We had
Mhm.
all of these things.
Right. These
You
things
just,
were happening.
you just either didn't talk about it, you
Right.
buried it in something else. You had, they everybody can look back, and because life is life, man. It says it's not
Yeah.
always, and unfortunately, this current generation that we're seeing is going through a world that is not something we've ever seen before. I mean, we talked about it yesterday, The Anxious Generation, which is a book by
Yeah.
Jonathan Haidt, and it's just, there's so much data. Yes, even my husband. who is an educator. He's an amazing, compassionate, empathetic, sympathetic human. He recognizes the changes he's been teaching for a long time. But even he struggles. He's like, why is it that every kid says they have depression or says they have
Mhm.
anxiety? And he's just like,
Mhm.
he can't wrap his brain around this shift. And I'm like, when I read the book that he's this generation, and again, Jonathan says in the book, prove me wrong. He's saying this is
Mhm.
not the gospel, but the
Mhm.
data is awfully in
Mhm.
a line, right? And numbers
Yes.
don't lie.
Yes. Yes.
That the we have caused a we have created an experiment that was wildly unregulated. We had no idea
Mhm.
the outcome, and that was putting screens in the hands of young people, and they haven't developed skills to communicate. You can tell a
Mhm.
kid that's connected, you can see it physically versus one that is not, there's
Mhm.
it's hard to say, we need to you to put your phone down, put your phone down. And I'm like, well, who put the phone there? It's
Yes.
just, and
Yes.
I'm not pointing fingers as a whole. And, I was very fortunate to grow up without social media. My first phone when I was 19 or 20 didn't have text or social, none of that.
Right.
But even for me, it's like I can't understand what they live like or what they go through because
Mhm.
that's just how they do it now.
Right.
How can we make it right? How can we create a world that they can live in and thrive in, right?
Mhm.
So anyway, I'm rambling,
Well,
obviously.
no, I love it. So when you're talking to kids in the group about anxiety, I'm sure you bring in how cell phones are part of this yucky feeling that everyone has. And whether we're going to diagnose it as depression or anxiety. And I think a lot of it comes from social media because there's a lot of self-diagnosing because they're
Yeah,
seeing videos and TikToks where people are saying, "Oh, if you have these symptoms, then
yep,
you have anxiety or you have depression." And I even get sucked into that sometimes. I'll look at stuff and I'm
right.
like, "Oh no, I didn't know I had
I know.
this." Or, but I also am old enough to know like, "Oh yeah, that's just whatever." A young person who doesn't have that discerning part of their brain is like, "Oh, I have all these problems." And we're making it be a problem. Like, oh, you have anxiety? Well, everything's terrible. And so I'm sure in your talk, you talk about this and talk about social media and phones and how this is kind of connected. So what is the response? I mean, do kids respond to that? Do they feel like, yes, I think there is something here? Or are they like, don't you dare talk about my phone? Or
You know, I don't talk about it as much as you think I would. And that's
okay.
only because I know it gets beaten down their throats. And
Yes, yes.
so, and I don't want them to instantly hear me say social
Hmm.
media is the problem, and then I've lost them. They've completely turned it
Sure.
off.
Hmm.
That's not to say it's not important. I just maybe talk about it in a roundabout way without talking about it, right?
Sure.
So
Sure.
if the purpose of my talk is to get kids communicating, and we
Hmm.
physically do that, and I show the benefits of having conversations, I
Hmm.
show them, and not it's not just the talking, it's the active listening, right? So I'm roundabout way showing the value of these conversations and how simple and non-intrusive they are.
Yeah.
And you're right, there's in social psychology, there's this theory called the need to belong theory. And
Hmm.
that implies that, you know, especially we see this, it's just like when someone's at their vulnerable, when someone's in a vulnerable state, period, it's more likely you're able to convince them of something if there's like a comfort in return, right? And
Hmm.
there's like a community because humans crave community, hence the need to belong theory.
Hmm.
And we see this a lot in, like, again, this is just an example, but like cults, right? The people
Yeah.
who fall into cults are in very vulnerable positions and then they feel welcomed. And
Yeah.
then they start to, that we see that in everything,
Hmm.
not just, the negative. We also see it in positive because it's just the human condition. We want to feel connected. We want to feel seen. We want people to hear us and know what we're going through. And that's we see that a lot with young people. And I think that
Hmm.
unfortunately, it can also bring them into negative spaces. Like, oh,
Hmm.
I also have a home life like this. Maybe I'm this
Hmm.
way, or I also
Yeah.
have this. And then they take it on as an identity, which is
Yes.
part of the issue. I don't take my
Hmm.
anxiety on as an identity. I'm sure I did when I was younger, but
Sure.
it's a part of me. And I make that very clear, to young people. It's like, I don't suffer from this. I live with it. It's a part of who I am. It's not all of who I am.
Right.
And, so those are some just little distinct.
I like that. Do you do breakout stuff with them too, or is it like this all the whole group, you're talking to them and then you're like, "See you later, have a good day."
I try not to do that because I know that, it's like you want to create this impact, and it's like, oh, I show
Mhm.
up for an hour and then I'm gone. But
Mhm.
I like to, even whether I speak at schools or a conferences, I can hang out much longer and do breakout sessions. But if
Mhm.
I go to schools, I'm like, can I go to lunch and hang out? Like, can I go hang out?
Mhm.
Because that's when the kids feel like they can
Yes.
make a connection, is when that wall is taken down. But the
Mhm.
breakout sessions I do are very much group centered. We're talking about things that the whole point of my breakouts is I want them to see that they're not alone. I want them to see that someone
Mhm.
else has the same internal dialogue, that need to belong theory, but I want to put it into a positive. Like, you're not alone because, and I say this with love to young people, you are not special. And I mean that in like
Right. Yeah.
you're unique, right? Like your footprint is unique and who you are as a person is unique, but what you go through is not unique. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so convinced ourselves that no one's going to understand how I'm feeling. I'm just
Mhm.
going to burden someone with their problems. I'm just feeling all this shame because I'm the only person in the world that has ever gone through this. It's just these
Mhm.
constant things that are just meant to keep us in isolation, which is the big thing, right? So why to have these conversations about mental health, Cynthia, is because isolation is where mental and emotional health struggles thrive. And
Mhm.
the CDC recently said that that is the number one contributing factor to self-harm, suicide, and suicide ideation and school shootings, is they have found that isolation, when someone feels isolated, it is
Mhm.
it is just a tipping point for a lot of people.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
the narrative of I'm alone, no one understands me, no one's going to be
Right.
able to help me. It's and I tell them, like, these are just lies to keep you in isolation. How do we
Mhm.
move out of isolation? And that's really the main thing I do. How do we
Yeah.
help these young people move out of isolation with the power of conversation?
Sure. Oh my gosh, this is so inspiring to me. I just am like, "Oh my gosh,
I
all
feel
these
like
things
I'm
I wanna
rambling.
do."
I've had a lot of espresso today, so
No, I
just
love it.
rambling.
This is the kind of conversations I like to have. I was having a conversation like this in a coffee shop one day with a friend who is an OCD specialist. And we were just like, oh my gosh, and then this, and then this, and then this. And this lady came by and she goes, "You guys should have a podcast." And I was like, well, actually, I do. And so she and I actually did a podcast together because it's just like, it's interesting for people to hear these kind of conversations. And that's what I love about podcasts is that you can listen in on conversations on
Right.
purpose about
Yeah.
these different things. So your book, Lies Anxiety Has Told Me, I'm not sure if I had all the words exactly right, but do you have like activities in there or is it just kind of your story and like inspiration or how does the book work? Because I haven't looked at it.
So yes. So I have I make my points, the different lies. I kind of break them down with stories for each one. And then the second half of the book is kind of like my process. And I call it my triple A strategy, which is act, assess, and adjust.
Mm,
And through that process, I even have like little charts in there, like how to identify the controllable factors versus what you can't control, and how to free the uncontrollable things from your brain and things like that.
mhm,
But, the whole idea is before I say this, it has to be healthy and something that serves you. I'm very clear about
mhm,
that because we
mhm.
all can do things that feel good that aren't
Right.
healthy. Don't serve you.
Yes.
So, but if you can find and identify, prioritize, and execute. So act would be your first step. Find something that is healthy and that serves you. Because my whole thought process is like, even as a counselor, the tools I would give people for anxiety and things like that were very reactive tools. They're very like, when you're feeling anxious, here's what you should do.
Mhm,
But I'm like, well, if you're going to live with this, maybe you need to do the things that keep you well. Like when you feel
mhm.
well, you do the things, right? Just like
Yeah.
therapy and counseling are most effective when you feel well.
Mhm.
People think of therapy and counseling as like, oh my God, something's wrong. You're going to therapy because something's wrong. It's like, actually, I'm going because things are good, because
Yeah.
life is going to happen and I need
Right.
the tools to be able to do
Mm.
that. So side note, I was at a school and told the students my husband and I were in couples counseling. Everyone went, like it was just like, and I was like, oh, but that really was so awesome they did that because I paused and I was like, ah, the stigma alive and well with young
Hmm.
people. Like I called them out
Yeah.
on it. And I was like, you only reacted that way because you thought something negative was happening. So you're
Hmm.
actually saying counseling is for people who are going through bad things or who feel bad or who need help because your
Hmm.
marriage or your so and I was like, actually the best time to go to therapy and counseling is when things are good. Like
Yeah.
that's the stigma that I'm trying to break and like call people out on is like,
Hmm.
but
Yeah. I love that.
anyway, but act, yes, I almost lost my train of thought because I can. It's the espresso, but act is like find the things that, serve you. And that can be different for everybody. I don't think that they're like if one more person tells me to do deep breathing, I might punch them in the throat. Okay?
Right.
So it's just don't tell me to
Hmm.
deep breathe.
I know.
But like fitness, like movement is really beneficial. It's proven to change the physiology of your brain. It can benefit everybody. But running is not for everybody. Walking is not for
Hmm.
everybody.
Right.
Weightlifting is not for everybody. The acting part is like pick something. Say you're going to go for a walk every day. Act on it. Actually do the things. And
Hmm.
then assess, is this beneficial for me? Is it helping me? Do I hate it? Because if you hate it, stop it.
Hmm.
Like don't
Right.
don't attach a negative emotion to something that's
Hmm.
supposed to be positive. So
Hmm.
that's the assess. Is it working? Is it not working? Can I do more? Should I do less? And then adjust, right?
Hmm.
Adjust this if you need to. And it's just, but it's one thing at a time, right?
Yep.
Like it's,
Well,
but
and I love that too, because when back in the day when I was always on diet and exercise programs all the time, and like I was like so rigid about it, I was so all or nothing. Like I'm going to do everything or I'm going to do nothing. And when I was doing everything, it was so hard and I was so angry and I hated all of it. And I had a person as a guest one time on my podcast who was talking about sometimes exercise creates anxiety and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that's what was happening because I I was using it as a punishment for myself. Like, well, you've been terrible eating, so now you have to run or you have to do this thing, which caused me to have anxiety about having to do the exercise. And when she was talking about that, I was like, oh, that totally makes sense. Like, do things that you like, do things that feel good, do things, like don't add anxiety to something that you're trying to feel
that's
good.
healthy and it
Yeah.
serves you. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And this is why most people fall off after
Hmm.
January resolutions for fitness because they
Hmm.
they change so many things at one time. And
Mm.
then because of course they want to get there the fastest, right? And
Right.
they don't see that like consistency with the small things
Right.
are actually what create long-term results. But that's why I talk about this in the book too. And you brought up a really great point. The power of and is real. And I believe in the power of
Mm.
and. I believe that it's not one or the other. So I can, live with and manage my anxiety and have a happy life. It's not one or the other. And just like fitness, I can love and accept my body for where I'm at and work to improve it at the same time.
I
It's
love that.
not, I hate this, I'm going
Mm.
to change it because it's not going to work. It's just not. And
Right.
and it's a skill, mindset and mindset shift, like you said at the beginning of the podcast, reframing. And that's a
Hmm.
skill which means you have to work on it. And
Yes.
I think the common misconception is that people look at certain people and think, oh, they've got it all figured out. It's like, no, actually,
Hmm.
they just consistently do the work to make, and move through the hard moments. And
Hmm.
yeah, so I believe in the power of
Yeah.
and.
Mel Robbins had this thing this week, and I sent it to my friend, and I can't remember what words she was actually using, but it was something like, you got to do the boring, everyday stuff to get to this success level that you want. You're not just going to get there. And if you're not willing to do the boring, everyday, drudgery things, and it doesn't mean that everything is like that, but you have to be willing to do those things too, or you're never going to get the things. And so I sent my friend, because she's always saying I work too hard. And I really am enjoying what I'm doing. And I don't think I'm working too hard, but I said, I'm in this time right now where I'm just like doing all the things and I'm not going on a lot of vacations and I'm not spending a lot of money because everything's going into this business because it's going to be a thing and I'm going to make it be a thing. And it's just part of like you have to go through that. I have to do the work to get the thing that I want. And we all have to be willing to do that if we want the thing. And we can't just say, oh, I want this success. Or we look at people who are successful or managing their anxiety well or whatever and just say, oh, it must be easy for them. Well, we don't know all that work and all those everyday drudgery things they did to get to what looks like success or is success in that person's life. So you do talks at conferences and schools all across the United States. I'm guessing not the world, but maybe the world.
Not the world in person, not the
Oh,
world in person. But yes, mostly the United States and yeah, a lot in the Midwest and the East Coast and the South. The
okay.
West Coast is interesting with there's not a at least I mean there's been a couple like I'm going to California later this month, but not like the Midwest and the East. Like man,
Okay.
they're pretty much all about it. But uh,
Okay.
yeah, and so I do a lot of teen conferences in the CTE circuit. So like FFA, Student Council, FCCLA, 4-H,
Mm,
like those big conferences, teen conferences.
great.
But I do a lot of assemblies at schools too.
hmm
And
So
I
people can find you on your website to do that. They can find your book there, stuff in my show notes too, so they can find you or just send you messages about, how your book inspired them, or maybe if they heard you speak somewhere, like just reaching out to you. I know that's fun to hear that stuff.
yeah, I find me on Instagram. That's like my favorite platform. I create a lot of I call it real life with anxiety, like REEL, because I create
Mm-hmm.
real different things in my life that, I still live with and man, and just to show people that they're not alone and yeah. So
Yeah, I love that so much. Well, I'm so glad that we met each other for one and that you were
I,
on this podcast.
I
So,
appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
yes. Oh, you're so welcome. And we'll be seeing you around, I'm sure.
Well, I'm always around. So
That's good. I love it. I will be seeking you out.